Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're opening up a really fascinating stack of source material that, it's less about baseball statistics and more about, well, cultural pathology, historical anxiety, and just the intoxicating high of a long-term obsession.
It really is. We are doing a deep dive into the emotional and organizational whirlwind that was the 2004 Boston Red Sox season.
And what's so great about these sources is they aren't some detached historical analysis written years later.
No, not at all. They're structured as a double diary
Yeah.
with real-time email exchanges. So you're capturing the raw, immediate, and honestly sometimes wildly contradictory emotional data from two committed observers as this season's actually happening.
It's a deep dive into being a faithful fan under, well, extreme duress.
And that's the mission. Right, to unpack how those intense expectations, the organizational drama, and 86 years of historical paranoia all came together to fuel one of the most emotionally complex seasons in baseball history.
Exactly. You have to understand, the pressure going into 2004 it was completely unique. After the just agonizing failure of 2003, anything short of a world championship was already being framed as a total catastrophic failure.
And this was months before the first pitch.
Months before. It was an all-in mandate. The front office had committed to these huge, high-priced contracts.
Right, knowing that players like Nomar Garciaparra and Pedro Martinez were probably in their final years with the team. They went out and got Curt Schilling, a true ace and a reliable closer in Keith Foulke.
This wasn't a building year.
No. This was the year. The feeling from the observers was that if this specific group of players couldn't win it all, they were just doomed to repeat the past forever. The emotional stakes were, as you said, just astronomical.
Okay, so let's get into it. We have this real-time emotional ledger to guide us, and it starts right where the anxiety begins, deep in the traumatic history of the organization.
To really get the mindset of a 2004 Red Sox fan, and therefore the mindset of our sources, you have to start with that historical burden they were carrying. This isn't just about the curse of the Bambino.
No, it's much deeper. It's like institutionalized trauma.
It is. The anxiety goes all the way back to the old-school Yaki ownership, decades before this new front office. The sources, they remember these agonizing losses, but specifically, they remember this pattern.
The pattern of management just sacrificing stars from the great teams of the mid-'70s, like the 75 and 78 teams, to free agency.
And it seemed like it was for cost savings or, sometimes even just spite. It established this idea that even when the team was good, you couldn't trust the organization itself to keep it together.
That institutional failure, it just sets the stage for the kind of acute, specific agony the sources describe.
And they describe it in such textured detail. They revisit Game 6 of the 1986 World Series, which was, the ultimate near miss. One of the observers was living deep in Mets country at the time.
One strike away, over and over again.
And the detail here is just excruciating. When the ball rolls through Bill Buckner's legs, Billy Bucks, as they call him, he couldn't even scream or throw something.
His TV was turned down low so he wouldn't wake his baby. So what he heard instead, in that moment of absolute collapse, was the sound of his Mets fan neighbors cheering.
That's silence, punctuated by the enemy's celebration. That's the definition of institutional trauma living in your memory.
Yeah.
You internalize the collapse.
That kind of history, it fosters a certain eccentricity, and you see that nowhere more clearly than in the ballpark itself.
Oh, yeah. The observers' descriptions of Fenway Park are a testament to how the physical space sort of reinforces that emotional state. They compare it to long-gone parks like Forbes Field, with its green girders, cramped wooden seats.
And these oddball dimensions that seem almost designed to punish a logical fielder. It's the perfect setting for neurosis.
And you get these wonderful specific details. The green monster, that huge left field wall, it's topped with those sail-like nets to catch home runs. It gives it this weirdly nautical, almost ephemeral feel.
And the people watching the game were just as oddball as the architecture.
The sources paint this incredible picture of this scruffy tribe of regulars. You have the general, this grizzled guy with rotten teeth, wearing a Civil War cap.
And he would literally challenge people around him to a game on his portable Othello board.
In the middle of a baseball game. Then you had the husky guy who would always show up late, bellowing, "Whoa, whoa, whoa,"
2 decades after Wade Boggs left the team.
while eating dinner out of a Tupperware container. It's this whole ecosystem of dedication, ritual, and, frankly, deeply ingrained slightly unhinged repetition.
Even the modernizations had that quirkiness. They talk about the excitement over the monster seats, these green metal stools with a counter space and a great view.
A dream setup, even if it meant sacrificing a little bit of the park's sacred geometry.
And all of this brings us to the core framework the observers use to understand their own obsession. They call it the lump in the sofa cushion theory of addiction.
It's a great analogy. It provides the perfect frame for the fan experience.
The theory is that addiction, whether it's to drugs or alcohol or whatever, it doesn't just disappear when you stop. It just pops up somewhere else, like a lump in a cushion.
Right. You push it down in one place, the energy just transfers somewhere else. You stop one compulsion, and maybe it moves to compulsive eating or a sports obsession.
And they apply this theory directly to themselves. They are totally self-aware. They identify as baseball junkies, or more specifically, Red Sox junkies.
They see the pattern.
Yeah.
And so the hope is just profound, almost desperate. They believe that if the Sox can finally win the World Series, that ultimate decades-in-the-making fix might finally break what they call this long-term malarial fever of obsession.
The implication there is massive. They're not just looking for a championship. They're seeking liberation from their own psychological patterns.
But does it actually work that way? Does the fix of a World Series actually cure the obsession? Or does the neurosis just shift, maybe to a fear of losing the title?
The stakes are basically personal sanity.
And they see 2004 as the ultimate test case. Precisely because of this pervasive paranoia, they introduced this idea of the anxiety tax.
I love that term. They observed that unlike other anxious figures, like, say, Woody Allen or David Foster Wallace, who are at least aware that their neuroses are irrational.
Sox fans have good reason to be paranoid. Their neurosis is historically and factually justified.
And that's why the anxiety tax is so fascinating. It means they're experts at deconstructing failure in real time. They describe being at a game, an 8-1 laugher against a bad team like Tampa Bay.
And you'd think you could relax, but no.
They immediately subject it to this minute statistical analysis, a couple of base runners, one boneheaded pitching change, and that comfort can instantly turn into pure torture.
That low-level dread is the tax you pay for being a faithful fan in Boston. Every single success contains the seed of impending disaster.
And they know the organization has a decades-long track record of delivering that disaster, which makes the managerial and roster shifts of 2004 so critically tense.
The organizational shifts coming into that year only amplified the pressure. The immediate context was, of course, the brutal ending of 2003.
Game 7 of the ALCS against the Yankees. Manager Grady Little leaving Pedro Martinez in way, way too long.
A crushing loss, and the front office reaction was swift and decisive. The old regime was out. In comes the whiz kid front office, led by the young GM Theo Epstein, a known disciple of the analytics legend Bill James.
And they fire the Chauncey Gardner-like Grady Little.
Meeting a simple, genial, but strategically naive manager.
And in his place comes Terry Francona. The sources detailed just how impossible his inheritance was. He gets a 3-year contract, but the silent promise was clear.
Anything less than a World Series means you pack your bags immediately.
He was walking into a snake pit. Not only do you have a fan base with justified historical paranoia, but a brutal local media just ready to crucify him.
And he inherited a clubhouse filled with what the sources politely call notorious prima donnas. The tension was just baked into the managerial structure from day one.
And yet, despite all that, the mood in spring training was electric because the roster was just undeniable. They had the offense that had outslugged the 27 Yankees the year before.
And the pitching staff finally looked complete. The rotation was legitimately considered the best in the majors.
Those reinforcements were the key. The sources highlight the acquisition of Curt Schilling, a proven ace, and Keith Foulke, a reliable closer.
The one piece they'd been desperately missing. The pressure on Schilling was immediate and intense. His debut was huge. And then later in the year, he ends up on the cover of Sports Illustrated.
Which instantly triggers fan fears of the infamous SI curse. Even positive attention was seen through this lens of impending doom.
And then you get these internal roster debates, which perfectly encapsulate the philosophical battle between the organization's new analytical approach and the fans' traditionalist love for heart and grit.
The debate around Brian Daubach is the best example of this.
Dauber, as they called him. He was that scrappy, blue-collar player that the fans just adored. The kind of player the old Red Sox teams were full of.
Daubach is my daddy, was the cheer you'd hear. He was competing for a spot against David McCarty.
A good defensive first baseman who, hilariously, also planned on trying to pitch.
And, of course, the emerging star, David Ortiz.
Dahlback represented a certain kind of old-time Red Sox player identity, regardless of his actual stats.
There's this fantastic telling anecdote in the sources about Dahlbach meeting his future wife. The Red Sox radio broadcaster Joe Castiglione set them up.
And Castiglione tells Dauber he needs to get a haircut because the woman didn't like ball players who hit on her.
And the punchline, which the observers note was just perfect. What hair! Dauber was practically bald.
It just speaks to that deep connection fans had with guys who simply played hard. One observer admitted that while Dahlbach didn't have a dog's chance of making the roster, quote, no one ever tried harder in the clutch.
But despite the hype and the Florida sunshine, spring training quickly delivered the inevitable reality checks. It just reinforced the paranoia that the season was already doomed.
The injury report started immediately. Nomar Garciaparra, who was already the subject of some quiet drama, was dealing with a bruised heel, Achilles tendonitis.
Trot Nixon, a key outfielder, looked doubtful for opening day. These weren't minor bumps. These were core players.
And the big names were struggling. Manny Ramirez, the team's offensive engine, was hitting a pathetic .172.
And the big free agent closer, Keith Foulke, was described in the sources as nothing short of horrible in his spring outings.
The observers saw it clearly. Their high-octane machine was sputtering before it even left the garage. They explicitly warned that if they lost any more important pieces, the season could quickly become a lost cause. The anxiety tax, it turned out, was already due.
So the season starts with that anxiety already primed, and it immediately shows up on the field. The very first game featured a moment of just complete strategic ineptitude.
The infamous Pokey Reese bunt controversy.
It was a perfect early signal of systemic failure. Fourth inning, first game. Reese comes up with 2 outs, runners on second and third.
And he decides, inexplicably, to bunt hard and is easily thrown out. Kills a crucial rally.
One observer just called it a classic case of a baseball player taking dumb pills. It was a mental error that, for the fans, immediately confirmed their worst fears about the team's focus.
And speaking of focus on money, the opening day payrolls did nothing to soothe that anxiety. It just reinforced the whole evil empire narrative.
The Yankees were sitting at a massive $183 million. The Sox were a distant second at $125 million.
That $58 million gap. It was just continuous ammunition for the belief that even the Sox high spending was still not enough to compete.
And yet, early on, there were some signs of decisive management. The whiz kid front office showed they were willing to act fast.
Right, with the struggling starter, Mr. Kim. He had that infamously goofy, erratic motion, couldn't find the plate consistently. He was quickly moved out of the rotation, sent down to Pawtucket.
And Bronson Arroyo, who turned out to be a reliable replacement, was moved in. That showed the front office acting quickly to solve a problem, not just sticking with the plan.
But the real organizational crisis hit in May and June. The observers called it simply the swoon. The team started playing with this lackluster who-cares sloppiness.
There was a visible lack of energy, and the sources immediately recognized the strategic flaw that was causing it.
And this flaw was placed squarely on Theo Epstein's desk. It was his failure to get a reliable, veteran middle reliever in the offseason.
It created this profound weakness in the bullpen. Francona was left with no choice but to rely on these unproven young lefties like DiNardo and Molaska.
He was constantly forced to go to his number 11 and 12 pitchers in high-leverage situations.
The strategic consequence of that was enormous. It stressed out the entire starting rotation. Francona had to either leave starters in too long because he couldn't trust the bullpen,
or pull them early, only to hand the lead to an unreliable arm. It led to this relentless, hostile media coverage aimed directly at Francona.
even though the sources identified the roster construction, not the manager, as the root cause.
The pressure cooker was at its max. The team was underperforming. The media was baying for blood.
And the Yankees kept winning, often coming from behind, which just reinforced the observers' belief that, quote, those suckers lurk.
And then, in July, we get the seismic, crucial turning point, the A-Rod Veritek brawl, the July rhubarb.
This was where the emotion finally broke through. Alex Rodriguez, after getting hit by a pitch from Arroyo, starts jawing at the pitcher.
And Jason Veritek, the catcher, immediately gets in A-Rod's face and gives him a hard shove. It triggers a massive, chaotic, bench-clearing incident.
Veritek and A-Rod are ejected, but the psychological impact on the team, on the fan base, it was immediate.
The sources credit this brawl with finally waking the Sox from their 2-month stupor. They won 2 of 3 against the Yankees right after that fight.
The media narrative shifted completely. TV commentators suddenly started questioning A-Rod's toughness.
But the fan base, almost universally, credited Veritek for getting in A-Rod's face and galvanizing the team. They stopped acting like prima donnas and started acting like fighters.
But the high of that moment was followed almost immediately by a shocking emotional low. The Nomar Garciaparra trade on July 31st.
The whiplash for the fans must have been severe.
It was a trade that just completely reset the emotional ledger. Nomar, a fan favorite, the face of the franchise for years, was shipped to the Cubs.
For Doug Mankiewicz and Orlando Cabrera in a complex three-team deal, the official rationale from management was about plugging defensive holes and getting a doubles machine in Cabrera.
But the unspoken reason, which the observers immediately latched onto, was simple. They were afraid Nomar would walk in the offseason.
It felt like a repetition of the Yawkey regime's worst habits, refusing to pay stars, trading beloved players before they could leave. It felt like the ultimate betrayal of the faithful.
Their reaction was explosive, but it fractured pretty quickly. At first, there was just disgust. It felt like a panic move that didn't get nearly enough in return.
But then the Boston sports writers, especially guys like Dan Shaughnessy, immediately launched this coordinated smear campaign.
The observers saw it as pure management shilling, just trying to justify this hugely controversial move.
And the narrative instantly became so corrosive. Nomar was never a team player. He was a downer, a liar about his heel injury.
Suggesting he made it up to maintain his market value in free agency.
Right, and a selfish guy who put his stats before the team. The media was, in effect, venting 86 years of frustration by trying to completely rewrite the legacy of one of the franchise's biggest stars.
The emotional toll of that betrayal was devastating. There's this heartbreaking detail from one observer about his 5-year-old grandson, a huge Nomar fan.
The kid was openly weeping after the trade, and he declared, "I guess I'm a Cubs fan now."
That just illustrates the deep personal connection that gets lost when a front office makes an analytically justified but emotionally catastrophic decision.
And defensively, the immediate results were chaos. The new patchwork defense, McCarty in left, Mueller at second, Cabrera at short. It created instant confusion. Balls were dropping that shouldn't have. The observers estimated the trade had already cost the team at least 3 games right after it happened.
So despite the chaos and the trauma of losing Nomar, the team finally finds its stride in August. They had to supply their own identity, and they did.
They kicked into gear with a crucial 10-game winning streak. And a lot of that psychological lift came from the resurgence of Kevin Millar.
Miller was the key leader. He provided the clubhouse identity that was missing. He coined the phrase, "cowboy up,"
which perfectly captured the gritty, us-against-the-world mentality the team needed. And he backed it up. He batted a ridiculous .470 in August.
He proved that when the team needed a spirit to rally around, he would physically and emotionally supply it.
And the high-priced pitching anchors delivered. Curt Schilling got his 20th win, and he'd received staggering run support all season.
This was the offensive firepower they had paid for, and it was finally clicking.
But amid all that, a Ricky phenomenon illustrated the profound internal tension between analytics and traditional strategy. Kevin Youkilis, the Greek god of walks.
Youkilis was an analytical dream, an on-base machine, hitting .317 with a truly elite .425 on-base percentage. He was the poster child for the Moneyball philosophy.
The very thing Epstein supposedly favored. And yet, he was consistently platooned and then eventually sent down to Pawtucket to make room for middle relief.
For a mediocre reliever like Mendoza,
he was the perfect encapsulation of what the sources called dopey ball. You're sending your analytical dream player down to make room for a decidedly average traditional role player.
And that decision, among others, brought Terry Francona's choices constantly back under scrutiny. The media and fans were questioning if he was really running the team.
Or if he was just Theo Epstein's dummy. Or, more pointedly, Frankenstein.
The complaints focused on 2 things. First, bullpen use. He was criticized for leaving starters in too long, famously leaving Schilling in a game in Toronto with a pitch count over 120.
Who then gave up a devastating grand slam. Or he'd rely on unreliable relievers like Leskanic and Malaska instead of resting his key setup guys.
And the second debate was his bunting philosophy. He gave hitters a green light on 3 counts, which was aggressive, but he loathed to bunt runners along in key situations.
It was a rigidity that was seen as a major flaw.
And yet, amidst all this strategic chaos, you had the enduring enigma and bright spot of Manny Ramirez. He completed his transformation from the sullen slugger in Cleveland to the don't worry, be happy Manny in Boston.
He definitely supplied the offense, making a legitimate run for MVP. But even with that production, his mental errors were constantly noted. He was prone to these fugue states.
He'd forget the number of outs, get doubled up, muffed a routine fly ball that cost Derek Lowe a deserved win.
These errors were seen as potentially hurting his MVP chances because even when winning, the team couldn't escape the chaos. But Manny, in his own strange way, he had the perfect perspective. After they massacred the Yankees late in the season, he just said, "They got all the World Series rings, man. We got nothing."
Which perfectly captured the psychological distance between the two teams heading into October.
So the regular season ends, the Sox secure the wild card. In the standings, at least, the Nomar trade is validated, and they enter October with a sweep of Anaheim in the ALDS.
It was swift, clinical, the first true taste of October dominance. The series ends with David Ortiz hitting a walk-off home run in Game 3.
And the crowd just erupts into this delirious, unified David chant. It solidified him as the new emotional heart of the team.
Then came the cage match everyone was really waiting for, the ALCS against the Yankees. And just as the historical burden dictated, it immediately devolved into the most familiar pattern of Red Sox horror.
The collapse was brutal and immediate. Down 0-3 almost before they knew what hit them. Game 1 was a complete disaster, Pedro Martinez declaring the Yankees his daddy.
And Johnny Damon wore the golden sombrero, which for those who don't know is 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts, total failure at the plate.
And Game 2 delivered the real gut punch. Curt Schilling's ankle injury was revealed to be severe. It was going to require surgery.
The widespread concern was that he was done for the year. It just instantly reinforced the belief that the curse was still in full, devastating effect. By all conventional logic, the team was dead in the water.
But then, we get to the section that you just have to savor. The precise moment history pivoted. The focus shifts entirely to the unprecedented 4 consecutive wins.
Game 4 was the first miracle. Sheer magical relief, as the sources put it. Derek Lowe, pitching on short rest after a rough season, throws 7 strong innings.
And the game just stretches on and on. The longest postseason game in history, 5 hours and 2 minutes of sustained dread.
Before David Ortiz delivers again, a walk-off home run in the 12th. The reaction from the observers wasn't even joy, it was just disbelief. The curse had failed to complete its job.
The momentum was now physical, emotional, and completely psychological. Game 5 was Schilling's legendary return, the ultimate cowboy-up moment.
He pitched on that severely injured ankle, famously bleeding through his sock. It was dubbed the guts game by the media.
That visual of the blood on the white sock became instantly iconic. It transformed Schilling from an expensive hired gun into an institutional hero.
And Games 6 and 7 were the absolute unbelievable triumph achieved in the Yankees' own house. The tension was still massive, but the tide had irrevocably turned.
In Game 7, they won by a touchdown, 10-3, punctuated by Johnny Damon's grand slam, a complete reversal of his Game 1 sombrero. The Yankees were psychologically cooked.
The aftermath in New York was just as memorable. One observer remembers the just churlish failure of the Yankees to congratulate the Red Sox on their electronic scoreboard.
A pathetic sign of their defeat. But more poignantly, he got a heartfelt hug from a downcast Yankee fan who, through his tears, said he truly hoped the Sox would finally go all the way.
That hug represented the turning of a page. 86 years of demons were finally being driven out.
The culmination then was the World Series sweep of the St. Louis Cardinals. And this is where the old guard, guys like Dan Shaughnessy, made their final desperate attempt to impose the old narrative.
Right. Arguing that beating the Yankees wasn't enough, the curse of the Bambino was still technically in effect until the final out.
But the games themselves were messy, reflecting the chaotic nature of the team. In Game 1, Tim Wakefield set a World Series record by walking 4 batters in 1 inning.
The series was defined by these near misses and messy triumphs. The idea that no lead is safe here, even in the face of destiny.
Game 2 belonged entirely to Schilling, now running on sheer adrenaline. He was described as awesome, facing these fierce battles, like Edgar Renteria fouling off pitch after pitch.
And he's still out there bleeding through his sock, facing down their best hitters.
And finally, the last out. The emotional payoff was complete and overwhelming. The sources provide these deeply personal details. One observer's mother-in-law, 81 years old and on oxygen tanks, was there.
During the final outs of the World Series, she was beaming like an 81-year-old cherub.
And as the Sox mobbed each other on the field, the cinematic chaos continued. Drew Barrymore and Jimmy Fallon were spotted kissing in the background, filming the fairy tale ending to the movie Fever Pitch.
The fiction and the reality of that emotional release just merged entirely.
The final words for the observers were words of forgiveness. Not just celebration, but a ceremonial release of all the old ghosts.
They offered forgiveness for Babe Ruth, for Billy Buckner, for all the previous stars who had suffered under the weight of that curse. All was forgiven. The long losing streak had finally burst, replacing years of irrational anger with deep, profound relief.
This emotional document we've analyzed, it really confirms the core insight. The 2004 season was not a triumph of flawless execution. If anything, it was a victory snatched from organizational chaos.
Precisely. The pressure from the new front office, Theo Epstein's willingness to make that controversial Nomar trade, it created immense instability and emotional shock.
But that same high-stakes, high-chaos environment is what ultimately fostered the emotional breakthroughs. The A-Rod Veritek fight, Millar's cowboy up rallying cry.
Wow.
That's what galvanized a talented but often underperforming team.
And Francona, the manager the media dubbed Frankenstein, he successfully navigated that brutal clubhouse and held the chaos together just long enough for the talent to assert itself. It's the ultimate lesson that sometimes winning requires a bit of beautiful disaster.
But there is one enduring tactical question that the source material raises, something that sticks with you long after the confetti falls.
We saw Curt Schilling pitch in 3 separate high-stakes starts on an ankle injury that was visibly bleeding through his sock, a condition that required surgery.
Yet in those 3 crucial games, 2 against the Yankees, 1 against the Cardinals, not a single opponent, not even contact hitters like Edgar Renteria who worked deep counts, attempted to exploit this obvious visible weakness.
They never laid down a bunt toward the first baseline to force Schilling to field his position.
They'd work him hard at the plate, but never tried to make him move. And the sources really force you to wonder, was this just strict adherence to modern baseball strategy that prioritizes power hitting over everything else?
Was it a fear of the crowd's reaction, especially at Fenway, which was already at a fever pitch?
Or, and this is the provocative thought, was it a deeper, profound psychological failure on the part of the opponents? Were they so consumed by the pressure of the moment that they overlooked the most fundamental, obvious tactical way to exploit their opponent's weakness?
That tactical oversight, or maybe that adherence to playing the game conventionally when you're facing destiny, it remains a truly fascinating postscript to the 2004 triumph. Something for you to mull over the next time strategy fails to meet reality.